They saw a quiet transfer student who barely spoke above a whisper, someone who flinched at loud noises and kept her eyes downcast in the hallways. What they didn't realize was that this seemingly fragile girl had been forged in the crucible of military discipline since childhood. Maya Rodriguez looked like easy prey, but she possessed skills that could neutralize threats in seconds. The bullies at Riverside High were about to learn that some people's silence isn't weakness, it's tactical restraint. Before we jump back, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Rodriguez pressed her back against the cold brick wall of Riverside High School, watching the stream of students flow past her like water around a stone. At 17, she had perfected the art of invisibility, though not by choice. Her petite frame barely reached 5 feet 3 inches, and her naturally quiet voice seemed to disappear entirely in the chaos of teenage chatter that filled the corridors each morning. Dark hair fell in straight lines past her shoulders, often serving as a curtain to hide behind when the attention of others felt too overwhelming. The autumn morning in Cedar Falls, North Carolina carried the crisp promise of another day she would have to navigate alone. 3 weeks had passed since her mother, Staff Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, had been transferred to the nearby military installation, uprooting Maya from the only stable home she had known in years. This move felt different from the others, heavier somehow, because her father remained deployed with his Army Rangers unit, somewhere she wasn't allowed to know. The constant relocations throughout her childhood had taught Maya that forming attachments was often more painful than the solitude that followed when orders inevitably came to move again. What her new classmates at Riverside High couldn't see beneath her careful facade was the steel that had been hammered into her spine through years of living the military lifestyle. Maya had spent her formative years on bases where discipline wasn't just encouraged, it was essential for survival. While other children her age had been learning to navigate playground politics, Maya had been absorbing lessons in tactical thinking, situational awareness, and the kind of physical conditioning that most adults never achieved. Her mother, recognizing that frequent moves would require Maya to defend herself in unfamiliar territories, had ensured her daughter received training that went far beyond what any civilian teenager possessed. From the age of 8, Maya had been learning hand-to-hand combat techniques designed for military personnel. Not the flashy moves seen in movies, but the efficient, devastating methods taught to soldiers who might find themselves in genuine life-or-death situations. Her training encompassed defensive tactics, pressure point manipulation, and the psychological aspects of confrontation that most people never considered. More importantly, she had been taught the discipline to control these abilities, to use them only when absolutely necessary, and to always seek de-escalation before engagement. The irony wasn't lost on Maya that her extensive training made her appear more vulnerable rather than less. Years of learning to assess threats before acting had taught her to observe rather than participate, to remain still rather than draw attention, and to speak softly because she understood exactly how much damage her voice could command when raised. Every movement she made was calculated, every response measured, not from fear, but from a deep understanding of consequences that her civilian peers couldn't comprehend. Cedar Falls represented her family's attempt at stability. Her mother's new assignment was supposed to last at least 3 years, long enough for Maya to finish high school in one place. The town itself was pleasant enough, with tree-lined streets, and the kind of small community atmosphere that looked perfect in tourism brochures. Riverside High School served both the military families from the nearby base and the local civilian population, creating a unique social dynamic that Maya was still learning to navigate. The student body divided itself along invisible lines that became more apparent with each passing day. The children of career military personnel understood the constant flux of deployment cycles, the burden of secrecy about their parents' work, and the discipline that permeated every aspect of their home lives. The civilian students, many of whom had lived in Cedar Falls their entire lives, possessed a different kind of confidence that came from deep roots and established social connections spanning back to elementary school. Maya found herself caught between these worlds, claimed by neither. Her military background set her apart from the civilian students, but her quiet nature made her equally isolated from the more outgoing military kids, who had learned to adapt to constant change by becoming aggressively social. She occupied a lonely middle ground, observing the complex social hierarchies that governed teenage life while remaining perpetually on the outside. The morning routine had become familiar in its alienation. Maya would arrive at school precisely 15 minutes before the first bell, allowing enough time to reach her locker and gather materials for morning classes without encountering the heaviest crowds. She had mapped the most efficient routes between her classes, identifying alternate paths that avoided the main thoroughfares where students congregated. During lunch periods, she chose seats at the periphery of the cafeteria, close enough to blend in but far enough away to avoid unwanted attention. This carefully constructed invisibility had served her well until Brittany Walsh noticed her. Brittany commanded attention the way some people commanded armies, with absolute authority and zero tolerance for insubordination. Standing nearly 6 feet tall with platinum blonde hair that never seemed to move despite the October wind, she possessed the kind of confidence that could only come from a lifetime of getting exactly what she wanted. Her family's wealth was evident in every carefully chosen designer piece she wore, from shoes that cost more than most families, spent on groceries, to handbags that served as status symbols rather than functional accessories. More dangerous than her money or her looks was Brittany's intuitive understanding of social dynamics. She could identify weakness the way predators identified prey, and she had built her reputation on systematically destroying anyone who threatened her position at the top of Riverside High's social hierarchy. Her reign wasn't maintained through kindness or leadership. It was built on fear, exclusion, and the calculated humiliation of anyone who dared to exist outside her approved circle. Chloe Martinez and Paige Thompson served as Brittany's constant companions, though the term friends would be inaccurate. Chloe, with her perfectly straightened dark hair and designer clothes that always seemed to echo Brittany's style choices, functioned more as a lieutenant than an equal. She possessed a cruel creativity that Brittany appreciated, always ready with cutting remarks that could reduce her targets to tears. Paige, blonde and athletic, provided the physical intimidation factor when psychological warfare wasn't sufficient. Together, they formed a triumvirate of teenage cruelty that had gone unchecked for so long that they believed themselves untouchable. Maya had managed to avoid their direct attention for almost 3 weeks by maintaining her carefully cultivated invisibility. She kept her head down during class changes, never made eye contact that could be interpreted as challenging, and spoke only when directly addressed by teachers. This strategy had worked in other schools, other bases, other temporary homes where she had learned that drawing attention was always more dangerous than remaining unnoticed. The first crack in her armor came during 3rd period, biology class. Mrs. Henderson had assigned group projects focusing on ecosystem relationships, and Maya found herself paired with Connor Davis, a quiet boy who seemed as determined to avoid the spotlight as she was. Connor had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the sort of genuine smile that suggested he hadn't yet learned to weaponize his emotions the way their peers had. As they worked together on their presentation about predator-prey relationships in North Carolina's coastal ecosystems, Maya discovered that conversation came surprisingly easily when it focused on academic topics rather than personal details. Connor never pressed her for information about her background or her family's frequent moves. He seemed content to discuss the fascinating ways that organisms adapted to survive in hostile environments, unaware of how closely their research paralleled Maya's own survival strategies. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, Subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. During their collaboration, Maya found herself relaxing slightly, allowing glimpses of her actual personality to emerge from behind the protective walls she had built. This small crack in her facade proved to be her undoing. Brittany Walsh possessed an almost supernatural ability to detect any shift in the social dynamics around her. When she noticed Maya talking animatedly with Connor during their biology presentation, something predatory awakened in her expression. Maya Rodriguez, the forgettable transfer student who had managed to remain invisible for weeks, had suddenly committed the cardinal sin of appearing comfortable, confident, even happy. In Brittany's world, happiness was a limited resource, and she wasn't about to let some nobody claim a share without permission. The attack began subtly, as these things always did. Brittany started with small gestures designed to test Maya's responses and establish dominance. A deliberately hard shoulder check in the hallway that sent Maya's books scattering across the polished floor. An exaggerated apology delivered with such obvious insincerity that nearby students couldn't help but notice the mockery. Comments about Maya's clothes, her hair, her accent that carried just enough volume to be overheard, but not quite loud enough to be called out by teachers. Maya recognized the pattern immediately. She had seen variations of this behavior on every base, in every school, wherever hierarchies existed and needed to be maintained through force. Her training kicked in automatically, not the physical techniques but the psychological ones. She made herself smaller, quieter, less visible. She adjusted her routes through the school to avoid Brittany's territory. She stopped speaking up in class, even when she knew the answers. She began eating lunch in the library instead of the cafeteria, claiming she needed to catch up on reading assignments. These defensive measures might have worked with a less determined predator, but Brittany Walsh had invested too much energy in establishing Maya as her target to simply lose interest. The quiet transfer student's refusal to fight back wasn't seen as wisdom or maturity, it was interpreted as confirmation of weakness, an invitation to escalate the campaign until a satisfying level of submission was achieved. The harassment intensified during the 4th week of October. Brittany and her followers began timing their movements to intersect with Maya's carefully planned routes through the school. They would appear around corners with perfectly innocent expressions, forcing Maya to choose between walking past them and enduring whatever humiliation they had planned, or taking longer alternate routes that made her late for classes. They started sitting near her during lunch periods in the library, conducting conversations designed to make her uncomfortable while maintaining plausible deniability if questioned by authority figures. Chloe Martinez proved particularly skilled at psychological warfare. She would make observations about Maya's clothes, her posture, her apparent lack of friends with the sort of fake concern that was more cutting than direct insults. Paige Thompson preferred more physical intimidation, standing too close in hallways, bumping into Maya's desk during class, accidentally spilling drinks near her locker. The attacks were always subtle enough to avoid official notice, but persistent enough to create a constant state of tension. Maya's training had prepared her for many scenarios, but it hadn't prepared her for the unique cruelty of teenage social warfare. Military confrontations, even training exercises, operated under clear rules of engagement. There were defined objectives, measurable outcomes, and honor codes that governed behavior even in conflict. The psychological campaign being waged against her at Riverside High followed no such rules. Brittany and her followers attacked her confidence, her sense of safety, her basic right to exist in shared spaces without fear or humiliation. The worst part wasn't the actual harassment. Maya had endured far more challenging situations during her various training exercises. The worst part was the isolation that came with it. Other students at Riverside High had learned long ago that associating with Brittany Walsh's targets was dangerous. Even Connor Davis, despite their friendship during biology class, began keeping his distance when Brittany's attention focused on Maya. She couldn't blame him. Survival sometimes required difficult choices, and she understood the wisdom of avoiding unnecessary conflict. Maya's mother noticed the change in her daughter's demeanor but misinterpreted the cause. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez assumed that Maya was struggling with the normal adjustments that came with yet another relocation. She encouraged Maya to join clubs, to put herself out there, to remember that military families were resilient and adaptable. Maya listened to this advice with growing frustration, knowing that her mother's solutions would only make her more visible to her tormentors. The October nights grew longer and colder, mirroring Maya's increasing sense of isolation. She found herself lying awake, calculating how many days remained until her father's deployment ended. How many months until her mother might receive new orders? How many years she would have to endure if this assignment really did last through her graduation? For the first time in her life, the prospect of another military relocation felt like salvation rather than disruption. Maya's carefully constructed defenses began showing cracks under the sustained pressure. She started making small mistakes that she never would have made during her training, losing focus during classes, forgetting assignments, responding to provocations with visible frustration instead of maintaining her disciplined calm. These minor lapses only encouraged Brittany to press harder, sensing that her target was finally beginning to break. The breakthrough Brittany had been working toward came during a particularly humiliating incident in the school cafeteria. Maya had been eating lunch alone at her usual corner table when Brittany approached with a full tray of food. Flanked by Chloe and Paige, the cafeteria fell silent as students recognized the setup, understanding that they were about to witness another demonstration of Brittany's power. Maya looked up from her sandwich to find Brittany standing directly beside her table, tray balanced precariously in her hands. The blonde girl's expression was one of exaggerated concern, the kind of false sympathy that preceded public humiliation. "Oh, Maya," Brittany said loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear clearly, "you're sitting all alone again. That's so sad. Don't you have any friends here yet?" Maya's training kicked in automatically. She assessed the situation, calculated possible responses, and chose the path that would minimize escalation. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied quietly, hoping that simple politeness would diffuse the confrontation. Brittany's smile widened, sensing weakness in Maya's subdued response. "Are you sure? Because you always look so lonely. Maybe if you tried harder to fit in, people would want to be around you." Chloe and Paige giggled at their leader's performance, adding to the spectacle. Students at nearby tables had stopped, pretending to eat, openly watching the confrontation unfold. Maya felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment, but maintained her composure, knowing that any emotional reaction would only feed Brittany's need for dominance. "I appreciate your concern," Maya said, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest, "but I really am fine." What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. Brittany's grip on her tray shifted slightly, and the entire contents, including a bowl of tomato soup, a plate of spaghetti, and a chocolate milk carton, cascaded directly onto Maya's lap. The hot soup soaked through her jeans immediately. The pasta sauce stained her white sweater, and the milk splashed across her shoes and backpack. The cafeteria erupted in gasps and nervous laughter. Maya sat frozen, covered in food and humiliation, while Brittany performed an elaborate pantomime of shock and apology. "Oh my God, Maya, I'm so sorry," Brittany exclaimed, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "I'm such a klutz. Here, let me help you clean up." She reached for napkins, but her movements only served to spread the mess further across Maya's clothes and belongings. Chloe and Paige joined in the performance, offering to help while making the situation worse. Students pulled out their phones, recording Maya's humiliation for social media distribution. Maya sat perfectly still through the entire ordeal, her military training the only thing preventing her from responding with the violence that her tormentors had no idea she was capable of delivering. She felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded combat, the heightened awareness that made everything around her appear crystal clear and precisely defined. Her muscles tensed in preparation for action, but her mind remained disciplined, calculating, controlled. She could have ended the confrontation in seconds. A precise strike to Brittany's solar plexus would drop the taller girl instantly. A joint lock on Chloe's wrist would demonstrate exactly how much pain could be generated with minimal effort. A sweep of Paige's legs would send her crashing to the cafeteria floor with enough force to discourage future attacks. Instead, Maya stood slowly, food dripping from her clothes, and gathered her ruined belongings with steady hands. She looked directly at Brittany for the first time since the attack began, and something in her expression made the blonde girl take an involuntary step backward. "Accidents happen," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made several nearby students stop laughing. She walked out of the cafeteria with her head held high, leaving a trail of tomato soup and pasta sauce behind her. The spectators watched her go in silence, sensing that something significant had just occurred, though they couldn't quite identify what it was. Maya spent the rest of the lunch period in the nurse's office, cleaning pasta sauce from her hair and trying to salvage what she could of her ruined clothes. Nurse Peterson, a kind woman in her 50s who had dealt with countless teenage dramas, offered fresh clothes from the lost and found and asked no questions about how Maya had ended up covered in cafeteria food. As Maya changed into borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit, she found herself at a crossroads. Her training had taught her that strategic retreat was often the wisest course of action, that avoiding unnecessary conflict preserved energy for battles that truly mattered. But her training had also taught her that some lines, once crossed, required definitive responses to prevent further escalation. Brittany Walsh had just crossed one of those lines. Maya looked at herself in the small mirror above the nurse's sink, seeing not the humiliated victim that Brittany intended to create, but the disciplined soldier her mother had raised her to be. Her reflection showed determined eyes, squared shoulders, and the kind of calm that preceded decisive action. The war that Brittany had started was about to enter a new phase, and Maya Rodriguez was finally ready to show Riverside High exactly what kind of mistake they had made when they chose her as their target. The afternoon classes passed in a blur of whispered conversations and sideways glances. Word of the cafeteria incident had spread throughout the school with the speed that only teenage gossip could achieve. Maya endured the stares and the barely suppressed laughter with the same disciplined calm she had maintained throughout her weeks of harassment, but something fundamental had shifted in her approach to the situation. She was no longer simply enduring Brittany Walsh's campaign of intimidation. She was studying it, analyzing it, preparing for the moment when tactical patience would give way to strategic action. Maya Rodriguez had been trained by some of the finest military minds in the country, and she was about to demonstrate exactly what that training could accomplish when properly motivated. The real war was just beginning. The days following the cafeteria incident marked a turning point in Brittany Walsh's campaign against Maya Rodriguez. What had started as casual intimidation evolved into something more systematic and cruel. Brittany had tasted victory in the public humiliation of the lunch spill, and the intoxicating rush of absolute power over another human being proved addictive. She began to view Maya not simply as a target for occasional entertainment, but as a project requiring sustained attention and increasingly creative methods of destruction. Maya's composed response to the cafeteria attack had been interpreted by Brittany as either complete submission or dangerous defiance. The way Maya had looked at her in that moment, the weight behind those quietly spoken words about accidents, had planted a seed of unease in Brittany's mind that she couldn't quite shake. Rather than backing down, this uncertainty only fueled her determination to break Maya completely, to reduce her to the sobbing, begging victim that would confirm Brittany's absolute dominance over the social ecosystem of Riverside High. The harassment that followed became more sophisticated, more personal, and infinitely more dangerous. Brittany began researching Maya's background with the thoroughness of a military intelligence officer, though she had no idea how ironically appropriate that comparison would prove to be. She discovered that Maya's family lived in base housing, that her father was deployed overseas, that her mother worked long hours at the military installation. These details became weapons in Brittany's psychological arsenal, carefully deployed to maximum effect. During their shared chemistry class, Brittany made sure to sit close enough to Maya to stage whispered conversations about military families. She would discuss fictional news stories about soldiers being killed in action, speaking just loudly enough for Maya to overhear while maintaining plausible deniability if confronted. The cruelty was surgical in its precision, designed to exploit Maya's deepest fears about her father's safety, while appearing to be innocent conversation to any observers. Chloe Martinez proved particularly adept at this psychological warfare. She began following Maya's social media accounts, searching for any personal information that could be weaponized. When she discovered that Maya had attended 6 different schools in the past 4 years, this became fodder for a campaign of whispered rumors about why a family might need to move so frequently. The speculation ranged from financial problems to criminal activity to Maya herself being expelled from previous schools for violent behavior. These rumors spread through Riverside High with the viral efficiency that only teenage gossip could achieve. Students who had never spoken to Maya suddenly knew intimate details about her supposedly troubled past. Teachers began watching her more closely, wondering if there was truth to the stories about previous incidents of aggression. The isolation that Maya had worked so hard to maintain became a prison of suspicion and judgment. Paige Thompson contributed to the campaign through acts of petty vandalism and theft that were carefully designed to appear random. Maya's locker would be found open with books scattered inside, homework assignments would disappear from her backpack, and personal items would vanish only to reappear in embarrassing locations. When Maya reported these incidents to school administrators, the lack of witnesses and evidence made her complaints appear paranoid or attention-seeking. The psychological pressure began taking its toll in ways that Maya hadn't anticipated. Her military training had prepared her for direct confrontation, for clearly defined enemies and straightforward objectives. The nebulous nature of the social warfare being waged against her proved more challenging than any physical threat she had ever faced. She found herself second-guessing every interaction, analyzing every conversation for hidden meanings, and constantly scanning her environment for potential threats. Sleep became elusive as Maya's tactical mind worked overtime, trying to predict and counter Brittany's next moves. She would lie awake calculating defensive strategies, mapping alternate routes through the school, and planning responses to scenarios that might never occur. The hypervigilance that served her well during military exercises became exhausting when applied to the everyday social interactions of high school life. Maya's relationship with Connor Davis became one of the earliest casualties of Brittany's escalated campaign. Connor had genuinely enjoyed working with Maya on their biology project, finding her intelligence and insight refreshing compared to the superficial conversations that dominated most teenage interactions. However, as Brittany's targeting of Maya became more obvious and more vicious, Connor found himself caught in an impossible position. The social dynamics at Riverside High operated under unwritten rules that everyone understood, but nobody discussed openly. Association with Brittany Walsh's targets carried significant risks, and students who showed support for her victims often found themselves added to her list of acceptable casualties. Connor faced a choice between maintaining his friendship with Maya and preserving his own safety within the school's social hierarchy. The decision was made for him when Brittany orchestrated a public confrontation designed to force Connor to choose sides. During lunch period, she approached the table where Connor and Maya were discussing their upcoming biology presentation. Brittany's arrival was preceded by the sort of hushed anticipation that accompanied all of her public performances, as students throughout the cafeteria turned to watch the drama unfold. "Connor," Brittany said with the bright, artificial smile she reserved for her most calculated cruelties, "I didn't realize you were still hanging out with our little military brat. That's so sweet of you to take pity on her." Connor's face flushed red as he felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. Maya could see the internal struggle playing out across his features, the conflict between loyalty and self-preservation that she recognized from countless military scenarios where soldiers were forced to make impossible choices under pressure. "We're just working on a project together," Connor mumbled, not meeting Maya's eyes as he spoke. Brittany's smile widened as she sensed victory. "Of course you are. Well, when you're done playing charity case, maybe you'd like to sit with some normal people for a change." The invitation was delivered with the sort of casual cruelty that made it clear this was Connor's only opportunity to escape association with Maya. He gathered his belongings with shaking hands, muttered an apology that could have been directed at either girl, and followed Brittany to her table across the cafeteria. Maya watched him go with the detached observation of a soldier witnessing a tactical retreat. She felt no anger toward Connor, understanding that his choice was fundamentally rational given the circumstances. In a hostile environment, survival sometimes required sacrificing personal relationships for strategic advantage. Her training had taught her to respect such decisions, even when they resulted in personal cost. However, Connor's defection marked a significant escalation in Maya's isolation. The message to other students was clear. Even attempting friendship with Maya Rodriguez carried unacceptable social risks. She found herself completely alone in a way that went beyond mere physical solitude, existing in a bubble of enforced separation. That made every day feel like a siege. Brittany's satisfaction with Connor's public abandonment of Maya lasted exactly 3 days before she decided that mere isolation wasn't sufficient. The target had been weakened and cut off from potential allies, but she hadn't been truly broken. Brittany needed to see tears, needed to hear pleading, needed some concrete evidence that her campaign had achieved its ultimate objective of total psychological surrender. The next phase of attack focused on Maya's academic performance, the one area where she had maintained some measure of confidence and control. Brittany began a systematic campaign to undermine Maya's standing with teachers and administrators, using her family's influence and her own reputation as a model student to plant seeds of doubt about Maya's character and capabilities. In their shared English literature class, Brittany would ask thoughtful questions that seemed to reveal gaps in Maya's understanding of the assigned readings. The questions were carefully crafted to expose areas where Maya's frequent relocations had created inconsistencies in her educational background. When Maya struggled to answer questions about books she had never been assigned at her previous schools, Brittany would express surprise and concern about her apparent lack of preparation. These academic ambushes were particularly effective because they appeared to demonstrate legitimate deficiencies rather than mere social persecution. Teachers began to question whether Maya's quiet demeanor reflected deep thinking or simple confusion. Her grades, which had been consistently excellent throughout her academic career, began to slip as the constant stress and hypervigilance made concentration increasingly difficult. Maya recognized what was happening but found herself powerless to counter it effectively. Her military training had taught her to adapt to changing conditions, but it hadn't prepared her for an enemy who attacked through manipulation of authority figures and systematic erosion of institutional support. She watched helplessly as her academic reputation crumbled under the weight of Brittany's calculated campaign. The psychological warfare reached a new level of sophistication when Brittany began targeting Maya's relationship with her mother. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had always been a source of strength and stability in Maya's life, representing the military values of honor, discipline, and service that had shaped her daughter's character. Brittany intuited that this relationship was Maya's last remaining source of emotional support and began working to undermine it. Chloe Martinez proved instrumental in this effort, using her access to school administrative systems through her mother's position as a volunteer coordinator to gather information about Maya's attendance patterns, disciplinary record, and academic performance. This intelligence was then selectively leaked to create a narrative of declining behavior and suspicious activities that could be reported to Maya's mother through seemingly concerned school officials. Phone calls began reaching Staff Sergeant Rodriguez during her duty hours, reporting concerns about Maya's social isolation, academic struggles, and potential behavioral problems. The calls came from guidance counselors, teachers, and administrators who had been carefully fed information designed to create alarm about Maya's adjustment to civilian school life. Each call was factually accurate, but stripped of the context that would have revealed the systematic harassment underlying Maya's difficulties. Maya's mother responded to these reports with the disciplined concern of a military parent who understood the importance of maintaining standards and addressing problems before they escalated. She instituted additional structure at home, increased monitoring of Maya's activities, and began scheduling regular meetings with school officials to track her daughter's progress. These well-intentioned interventions only increased the pressure on Maya while providing Brittany with additional leverage for manipulation. The cruelly ironic aspect of this campaign was that Maya's mother was simultaneously proud of her daughter's restraint and concerned about her apparent inability to adapt to civilian social dynamics. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez interpreted Maya's refusal to fight back as evidence of effective military discipline, but she also worried that this restraint might be preventing Maya from forming the social connections necessary for healthy adolescent development. During their evening conversations, Maya's mother would encourage her to be more outgoing, to join clubs and activities, to put herself in situations that Maya knew would only provide Brittany with additional opportunities for humiliation. The gap between her mother's well-meaning advice and the reality of her daily survival at Riverside High created a sense of isolation that extended even to her most important relationship. Maya found herself lying to her mother for the first time in her life, concealing the extent of the harassment while maintaining the facade of a normal high school experience. The deception went against every principle of honesty and transparency that had been drilled into her since childhood, but she recognized that the truth would only result in intervention that would make her situation worse. Military families handled conflicts through official channels, formal complaints, and systematic escalation through command structures. Maya understood that involving her mother would transform her personal war with Brittany into an institutional conflict between military and civilian authorities. Such escalation would not only fail to resolve the immediate problem, but would also mark her permanently as someone who couldn't handle her own battles. The internal conflict between her desire for her mother's support and her understanding of the strategic implications created a new level of stress that began manifesting in physical symptoms. Maya developed chronic headaches, experienced difficulty concentrating during classes, and found her appetite diminishing as the constant tension made eating feel impossible. She began losing weight at a rate that would have concerned her mother if the baggy clothes Maya preferred hadn't concealed the physical evidence of her deteriorating condition. November arrived with the sort of gray, cold weather that seemed to match the bleakness of Maya's daily existence at Riverside High. The trees surrounding the school campus had shed their leaves, leaving skeletal branches that created harsh shadows across the walkways where she tried to remain invisible. The shorter days meant that her journey to and from school often occurred in partial darkness, adding an element of physical vulnerability to her already precarious social situation. Brittany's campaign had achieved most of its strategic objectives by this point. Maya was completely isolated from potential allies. Her academic performance was declining. Her relationship with authority figures had been compromised, and even her home life had become a source of additional pressure rather than refuge. A less determined predator might have declared victory and moved on to fresh targets, but Brittany Walsh had developed an almost obsessive need to witness Maya's complete psychological collapse. The breakthrough Brittany had been working toward came through an unexpected avenue. During a routine locker inspection conducted by school administrators, contraband was discovered in Maya's locker that she had never seen before. The items were relatively minor, a small amount of alcohol and some inappropriate magazines, but their presence violated school policy in ways that mandated disciplinary action. Maya's protests that she had never seen the items before were technically true but sounded exactly like the denials that administrators heard from guilty students every day. The fact that her locker combination was known only to her seemed to eliminate the possibility of planted evidence, though Maya understood immediately that someone with Chloe's access to administrative systems could easily have obtained the necessary information. The disciplinary hearing that followed was conducted with the sort of bureaucratic efficiency that left no room for explanations or appeals. Maya found herself facing a 3-day suspension, a permanent mark on her disciplinary record and mandatory counseling sessions designed to address what administrators perceived as deteriorating behavior and judgment. The irony of being punished for contraband that belonged to her tormentors was not lost on Maya, but she accepted the consequences with the same stoic discipline that had carried her through weeks of psychological warfare. She understood that protesting her innocence would only make her appear more guilty, and she recognized that Brittany had maneuvered her into a position where any response would be interpreted as evidence of the very problems the punishment was designed to address. Maya's mother received the call about her daughter's suspension while on duty, and the conversation that followed that evening was one of the most difficult of Maya's life. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's disappointment was evident in every word, though it was tempered by concern for what might be driving her daughter's apparent behavioral decline. "I don't understand what's happening with you, Maya," her mother said as they sat across from each other at their small kitchen table. "This isn't the daughter I raised. Military families maintain higher standards than this, and I need to know what's going on that's making you act out in ways that go against everything we've taught you." Maya stared at her hands, knowing that the truth would sound like excuses and lies. How could she explain that she was being systematically destroyed by someone who had never been officially caught doing anything wrong? How could she describe the sophisticated psychological warfare being waged against her when the evidence was so subtle and circumstantial? "I'm handling it, Mom," Maya said quietly, using the same tone she had employed when dealing with Brittany's confrontations. "Obviously you're not handling it," her mother replied with the kind of military directness that cut through pretense and denial. "Your grades are falling, you're getting in trouble at school, and you're clearly struggling with something that you won't talk to me about. I'm concerned that this civilian school environment is presenting challenges that you haven't learned to navigate properly." The conversation continued for over an hour, with Maya's mother trying various approaches to extract information while Maya maintained the disciplined silence that had become her primary defense mechanism. Eventually, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez concluded that her daughter was experiencing normal adolescent adjustment problems that would resolve themselves with proper structure and support. Maya spent her 3-day suspension in a state of suspended animation, using the forced isolation to recover some measure of psychological equilibrium while dreading her inevitable return to Riverside High. She knew that Brittany would interpret the suspension as confirmation that her campaign was succeeding, and she could only imagine what new forms of harassment would be waiting for her return. The return to school after suspension felt like walking into enemy territory without backup or clear objectives. Maya had always prided herself on her ability to assess and adapt to changing tactical situations, but the social warfare at Riverside High operated according to rules that seemed to shift constantly based on the whims of her primary antagonist. Brittany's satisfaction with the suspension was evident in every interaction, though she was careful to maintain the appearance of sympathy and concern whenever authority figures were present. She would approach Maya with expressions of worry about her obvious struggles, offering help and support in tones that dripped with false sincerity, while ensuring that their conversations were overheard by teachers and administrators. "Maya, I heard about your suspension, and I just want you to know that if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here for you," Brittany would say in the hallway between classes, loud enough for nearby faculty to overhear her apparent kindness. These performances were masterfully crafted to reinforce the narrative that Maya was a troubled student whose problems stemmed from internal issues rather than external harassment. Brittany positioned herself as a concerned classmate trying to help, while Maya's obvious discomfort with these interactions was interpreted as antisocial behavior or misplaced anger. The systematic nature of Brittany's campaign became even more apparent when Maya realized that her every move was being monitored and reported. Students who had never shown interest in her before began appearing wherever she went, taking note of her activities and reporting back to Brittany's network of informants. Maya found herself under constant surveillance that made even the most mundane activities feel threatening and exposed. The psychological pressure of the sustained campaign began affecting Maya's judgment in ways that concerned her professionally trained mind. She found herself making tactical errors that would have been unthinkable during her military training, responding emotionally to provocations instead of maintaining strategic discipline. Her situational awareness, normally sharp enough to detect threats before they materialized, became clouded by the constant stress and hypervigilance required to navigate Brittany's ever-changing attacks. Maya recognized that she was approaching a breaking point, but her training had taught her that acknowledging weakness was often the first step toward defeat. She continued to maintain her disciplined exterior, while internally preparing for the final confrontation that she knew was inevitable. Brittany Walsh had invested too much energy in this campaign to simply declare victory and move on. She needed a climactic moment that would demonstrate her absolute power over Maya Rodriguez. That moment was closer than Maya realized, and when it came, it would force her to choose between the restraint that had defined her character and the warrior training that had shaped her capabilities. The question was no longer whether the final confrontation would occur, but whether Maya would be ready to abandon the discipline that had protected her in favor of the skills that could destroy her enemies. The stage was set for a reckoning that would reveal exactly what kind of mistake Brittany Walsh had made when she chose Maya Rodriguez as her target. The quiet transfer student with the hidden military training was about to show Riverside High what happened when tactical patience finally gave way to strategic action. The November chill had settled permanently over Cedar Falls, bringing with it shorter days and an atmosphere that seemed to mirror the growing tension at Riverside High School. Maya Rodriguez walked through the hallways with the measured pace of someone who had learned to navigate hostile territory, every step calculated to avoid drawing unwanted attention while maintaining awareness of potential threats. Her suspension had marked her as damaged goods in the eyes of both students and faculty, creating an additional layer of scrutiny that made her daily survival even more challenging. Brittany Walsh's satisfaction with the suspension had evolved into something approaching obsession. The successful manipulation of school administrators and Maya's mother had provided her with an intoxicating taste of power that extended beyond the usual boundaries of teenage social warfare. She had proven that she could reach into every aspect of Maya's life, corrupting relationships and destroying reputations with surgical precision. Yet despite these victories, something essential remained unbroken in her target, a core of resistance that refused to crumble no matter how much pressure was applied. This resilience gnawed at Brittany with increasing intensity. She had expected Maya to break weeks ago, to either fight back in ways that would justify official retaliation, or to surrender completely in a display of public humiliation that would cement Brittany's dominance. Instead, Maya continued to endure with a discipline that Brittany found both infuriating and somehow threatening. There was something in Maya's eyes during their confrontations, a depth of control that suggested reserves of strength that Brittany couldn't understand or predict. The campaign against Maya had become Brittany's primary focus, consuming energy and attention that should have been directed toward maintaining her broader social empire. Chloe Martinez and Paige Thompson had begun exchanging worried glances. When Brittany launched into detailed plans for new forms of harassment, concerned that their leader's fixation on a single target was approaching dangerous levels of intensity. Maya's isolation had reached a point where she moved through Riverside High like a ghost, present but fundamentally disconnected from the social ecosystem around her. Teachers had been conditioned to view her with suspicion. Students avoided her with the instinctive fear of contamination by association, and even casual interactions with cafeteria workers or janitors carried the weight of potential surveillance and reporting. The loneliness was unlike anything Maya had experienced. During her family's frequent relocations, military communities understood the challenges of constant movement and transition, providing support systems for families dealing with deployment cycles and reassignments. Riverside High offered no such understanding or assistance, operating according to civilian social rules that seemed designed to reward conformity while punishing difference. Maya found herself spending increasing amounts of time in the school's least populated areas, seeking refuge in forgotten corners where she could eat lunch without enduring the constant weight of observation and judgment. The library had become too visible after several incidents where Brittany's followers had staged loud conversations about military families and their supposed problems. The gymnasium was off-limits during lunch periods, and most outdoor areas were too cold and exposed for comfortable isolation. She discovered a small alcove near the art wing where broken easels and outdated textbooks were stored, creating a space that was technically part of the school, but rarely visited by students or faculty. Maya began spending her lunch periods there, eating in silence while working on assignments, or simply sitting in the peace that came from temporary invisibility. This fragile sanctuary became the setting for an encounter that would change everything. Maya was finishing a history essay on her laptop when she heard footsteps approaching the alcove. Her training kicked in automatically, cataloging the sound. Patterns and movement rhythms that indicated multiple people trying to move quietly. She saved her work and prepared to leave, assuming that her hiding place had been discovered and would soon be compromised. Connor Davis appeared at the entrance to the alcove, looking nervous and apologetic. Behind him stood two other students Maya recognized but had never spoken to. A girl named Sarah Kim from her chemistry class, and a boy called Marcus Thompson, who she knew was on the school's debate team. All three looked uncomfortable, as if they were violating some unspoken rule by seeking her out. "Maya," Connor said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't being observed. "Can we talk to you for a minute?" Maya studied the group with the analytical attention her mother had taught her to apply to all potentially threatening situations. Connor's body language suggested genuine remorse and anxiety rather than deception. Sarah and Marcus appeared to be struggling with internal conflicts, wanting to say something but uncertain about the wisdom of speaking. "What do you want?" Maya asked, her voice neutral and carefully controlled. Connor stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. "We wanted to apologize for how everyone's been treating you, and to warn you about something." The warning carried enough urgency to capture Maya's complete attention. Her training had taught her to take intelligence seriously regardless of its source, and the obvious risk these students were taking by approaching her suggested that their information might be both valuable and time-sensitive. "What kind of warning?" Maya asked. Sarah Kim spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "Brittany's planning something big." something that's supposed to happen tomorrow during lunch period. Chloe was bragging about it to her friends in our chemistry lab. Marcus nodded confirmation. They've been talking about it for days, but they're being really secretive about the details. All we know is that it's supposed to be their biggest thing yet, something that will finally break you completely. Maya absorbed this information with the calm analysis her training had ingrained in her. Intelligence reports from civilian sources were often incomplete and colored by personal biases, but the fact that Brittany was planning an escalation was consistent with the pattern Maya had been observing. The psychological campaign had been building towards some kind of climax, and tomorrow's plan likely represented Brittany's attempt to achieve the decisive victory that had so far eluded her. "Why are you telling me this?" Maya asked, studying each of their faces for signs of deception or hidden agendas. Connor looked genuinely pained as he answered, "Because what we've been doing to you is wrong. I know I messed up when I abandoned you in the cafeteria, and I felt terrible about it ever since. You didn't deserve any of this, and we should have stood up for you instead of just watching it happen." Sarah nodded emphatically. "Some of us have been talking, and we're ashamed of how we've acted. Brittany doesn't speak for everyone at this school, but she's made it so scary to go against her that most people just stay quiet and hope she doesn't target them next." Marcus added, "We don't know exactly what she's planning, but we heard them talking about recording something and making sure everyone sees it. Whatever it is, they want it to be public and humiliating." The mention of recording triggered every alarm system in Maya's tactical awareness. Video evidence of harassment or humiliation could follow a victim for years, spreading across social media platforms and creating permanent digital scars that no amount of time could heal. Military families understood the importance of maintaining clean records and unblemished reputations, and any scandal that went viral could affect not just Maya but her mother's career and her father's security clearance. Maya thanked the three students for their warning and watched them leave with the nervous haste of people who had taken significant risks to do the right thing. Their information confirmed what her instincts had been telling her. For days, Brittany was preparing for a final assault that would either destroy Maya completely or force her to respond in ways that would justify official retaliation. The rest of the day passed in a state of heightened alertness as Maya analyzed every interaction and conversation for clues about Brittany's plan. She noted which students seemed to be watching her more closely than usual, tracked the movement patterns of Brittany's inner circle, and identified potential locations where a public humiliation could be staged with maximum impact. The warning had given Maya a tactical advantage that Brittany couldn't have anticipated. Instead of being caught off guard by whatever was planned, Maya could prepare defensive measures and contingency responses. Her training had taught her that the best way to counter an ambush was to turn it into a trap for the attackers, using their own aggressive momentum against them. Maya spent the evening reviewing everything she knew about Brittany's methods and psychology, building a comprehensive threat assessment that would help her predict and counter tomorrow's attack. She mapped the school's layout in her mind, identifying choke points and escape routes, surveillance blind spots, and areas where crowds might gather. Most importantly, she prepared herself mentally for the possibility that tomorrow might be the day when her restraint finally gave way to direct action. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with the sort of heavy cloud cover that made the school hallways feel more oppressive than usual. Maya dressed with particular care, choosing clothes that would allow for freedom of movement while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. She arrived at school early, using the extra time to conduct a final reconnaissance of areas where Brittany might stage her planned assault. The morning classes passed with unusual tension as Maya noticed an undercurrent of anticipation among Brittany's followers. They exchanged meaningful glances and whispered conversations that suggested something significant was scheduled for later in the day. Maya's enhanced awareness picked up fragments of excited chatter about phones, recordings, and making sure everyone would see what happened. Connor Davis caught Maya's attention during their shared biology class, making subtle hand gestures that indicated he was still monitoring the situation and would try to provide additional warning if possible. His obvious anxiety confirmed that whatever Brittany had planned was serious enough to worry even students who weren't directly involved. Lunch period arrived with the weight of an approaching storm. Maya made her way to the cafeteria with heightened alertness, scanning for unusual activity or suspicious positioning of potential threats. The normal chaos of teenage social dynamics seemed subdued, as if the entire student body was waiting for something to happen. Brittany Walsh was holding court at her usual table, surrounded by her core group of followers and several outer circle students who had been drawn into her orbit. Her body language radiated confidence and anticipation, the demeanor of a predator who was certain that today's hunt would finally be successful. Chloe Martinez and Paige Thompson flanked her with expressions of barely contained excitement, clearly eager for whatever performance they had rehearsed. Maya selected her usual lunch and found a table near the edge of the cafeteria, positioning herself where she could observe the room while maintaining access to multiple exit routes. Her training had taught her never to put herself in a position where retreat was impossible, and today that lesson felt more relevant than ever. The attack began with Brittany's approach, accompanied by Chloe and Paige in a formation that Maya recognized as designed to prevent escape. They moved with the confident swagger of hunters who believed their prey was already defeated, radiating the sort of predatory satisfaction that came from absolute certainty of victory. "Maya," Brittany said loudly enough to capture the attention of nearby tables, "we need to have a little chat about your attitude problem." Maya looked up from her lunch with the calm expression she had perfected over weeks of harassment, giving no indication of the tactical analysis running through her mind. She noted the positioning of Brittany's allies, the location of potential witnesses, and the growing attention from other students who sensed that something significant was about to occur. "I'm not sure what you mean," Maya replied quietly, maintaining the non-confrontational tone that had served as her primary defense throughout the campaign against her. Brittany's smile widened as she interpreted Maya's restraint as evidence of weakness. "I think you know exactly what I mean. You've been walking around this school like you're better than everyone else, acting all mysterious and superior. It's time someone taught you about your real place here." The confrontation was following a familiar pattern, but Maya sensed something different in Brittany's approach. There was an urgency to her aggression that suggested she was working toward a specific goal rather than simply seeking general humiliation. Maya's peripheral vision caught subtle movements among other students, phones being positioned and cameras being prepared. "I don't want any trouble," Maya said, rising from her seat with the fluid motion her training had made automatic. "I'll just finish my lunch somewhere else." Brittany stepped directly into Maya's path, using her height advantage to loom over the smaller girl. "You'll finish your lunch where I tell you to finish it. And right now, I think you need to learn some manners." The escalation happened quickly, with Chloe and Paige moving to flank Maya while Brittany continued her verbal assault. Students throughout the cafeteria had stopped eating, openly watching the confrontation with the fascination that came from witnessing someone else's destruction. Maya could see phones being raised, recording applications being activated, social media platforms being prepared for immediate distribution of whatever was about to occur. "You think you're so tough and mysterious," Brittany continued, her voice rising to ensure maximum audience engagement. "Let's see how tough you really are." What happened next crossed every line that Maya had carefully maintained throughout her ordeal at Riverside High. Brittany grabbed Maya's lunch tray and hurled its contents directly at her face, covering her with food and beverage while Chloe and Paige blocked any attempt to escape the humiliation. The attack was designed to be both physically degrading and perfectly positioned for the multiple cameras that were recording every moment. Maya stood motionless as food dripped from her hair and clothes, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that her training had taught her to recognize as the precursor to combat. Every muscle in her body tensed in preparation for action, but her disciplined mind continued to calculate consequences and alternatives, even as rage threatened to overwhelm her tactical thinking. "Not so mysterious now, are you?" Brittany laughed, playing to the crowd of students who were recording Maya's humiliation. "Maybe next time you'll remember to show proper respect." The public nature of the assault, combined with the obvious premeditation and recording, represented a clear escalation beyond anything Maya had endured previously. Her training had taught her to distinguish between harassment that could be endured and attacks that required immediate response, and Brittany had just crossed that threshold decisively. Maya wiped food from her eyes with steady hands, maintaining her composure despite the laughter and commentary from the crowd of witnesses. She looked directly at Brittany for several long seconds, allowing her expression to convey a message that the taller girl was too intoxicated by victory to properly interpret. "You're going to regret this," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made several nearby students stop laughing. Brittany misinterpreted the warning as empty bravado from a defeated opponent. "Am I? What exactly are you going to do about it, military brat? Run crying to your mommy?" Maya turned and walked away from the confrontation with the controlled stride of someone who was making tactical decisions rather than retreating in defeat. She could hear the continued laughter and commentary behind her, the excited chatter of students discussing the videos they had recorded and planning their immediate upload to various social media platforms. The bathroom near the science wing had become Maya's refuge during particularly difficult days, offering a space where she could clean up and recover her composure without additional witnesses to her humiliation. She pushed through the door and headed directly to the sink, beginning the process of removing food from her hair and clothes, while her mind worked through the implications of what had just occurred. The bathroom was empty except for Maya, providing the privacy she needed to process both the physical assault and its psychological impact. She had endured weeks of harassment by maintaining discipline and avoiding escalation, but Brittany's latest attack had been designed specifically to force a response. The public nature of the humiliation, combined with the recorded evidence that would soon be circulating throughout the school and beyond, demanded a different kind of strategic thinking. Maya was examining her stained clothing in the mirror when she heard the bathroom door open behind her. She turned to see Brittany, Chloe, and Paige entering with expressions of satisfaction and anticipation, clearly believing that they had achieved their objective of breaking Maya's composure. "Did you really think you could just walk away from us?" Brittany asked, advancing toward Maya with the confidence of someone who had never encountered genuine resistance. "We're not done with you yet." Maya's tactical awareness shifted into the hyper-alert state her training had taught her to access during potential combat situations. The bathroom was a confined space with limited exits, and she was outnumbered 3-1 by opponents who had demonstrated their willingness to use physical violence. Most importantly, she recognized that this confrontation was being staged away from witnesses and authority figures, suggesting that Brittany intended to escalate beyond the public humiliation of the cafeteria incident. "What do you want?" Maya asked, positioning herself where she could monitor all three opponents while maintaining access to the door. Chloe Martinez answered with the sort of cruel satisfaction that came from believing victory was assured. "We want to make sure you understand your place here, and we want to make sure everyone else understands it too." Paige Thompson held up her phone with a smirk. "Smile for the camera, freak. This is going to be even better than what happened in the cafeteria." The mention of recording triggered every alarm in Maya's threat assessment system. A bathroom. Recording crossed legal and ethical boundaries that went far beyond typical school harassment, representing the kind of serious violation that could have lasting consequences for everyone involved. More immediately, It suggested that Brittany was prepared to commit acts that would permanently damage Maya's reputation and dignity. "You don't want to do this," Maya said, her voice carrying a warning that her tormentors were too intoxicated by power to properly interpret. Brittany laughed with genuine amusement. "Oh, but I do want to do this. I've wanted to do this for weeks. You've been walking around here acting like you're better than everyone. But today everyone's going to see what you really are." The attack began with Brittany grabbing Maya's shoulder, intending to position her for maximum humiliation while Paige recorded the assault. It was at this moment that Maya Rodriguez finally reached the breaking point that had been building for weeks of sustained psychological warfare. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The quiet, submissive girl who had endured harassment without retaliation disappeared, replaced by something that moved with predatory efficiency and devastating precision. Maya's military training engaged with the automatic response of a weapons system that had been armed and targeted. Brittany's grab at Maya's shoulder was intercepted by a defensive technique that trapped the taller girl's wrist in a joint lock that had been designed for disabling armed opponents. The pressure applied was surgical in its precision, causing enough pain to freeze Brittany in place while avoiding actual injury. Maya's other hand struck a pressure point on Brittany's neck that sent waves of disorientation through her nervous system. "Let go of me," Brittany gasped, suddenly aware that she had initiated a confrontation with someone who possessed capabilities she couldn't comprehend. Maya's response was delivered in a voice that carried the authority of someone who had been trained to command under pressure. "You're going to delete that recording, all of you. Right now." Chloe and Paige stood frozen, uncertain how to respond to the sudden reversal of power dynamics in the small bathroom. The girl they had been tormenting for weeks had revealed skills that transformed her from victim to controller in a matter of seconds. Paige raised her phone as if to continue recording, but Maya's peripheral vision caught the movement. Without releasing her hold on Brittany, Maya pivoted and struck the phone with a precisely calculated blow that sent it flying into the bathroom stall, where it shattered against the tile wall. "I said all of you," Maya repeated, maintaining the joint lock that kept Brittany completely under her control. The demonstration of Maya's capabilities continued as Chloe attempted to flee the bathroom. Maya released Brittany and intercepted Chloe's escape with a movement that was both fluid and devastating. A simple leg sweep sent Chloe sprawling across the bathroom floor, while Maya's immediate return to a combat stance made it clear that she was prepared to neutralize all threats with equal efficiency. "Please," Brittany whispered, finally understanding that she had initiated a confrontation with someone who possessed the training and willingness to destroy her completely. "We'll delete everything. Just don't hurt us." Maya looked at each of the three girls with the cold assessment of a soldier evaluating defeated enemies. "You recorded me without my consent in a bathroom. In some states, that's a felony. You've been systematically harassing me for weeks, creating a hostile environment that has affected my education and my family relationships. You planted contraband in my locker that resulted in my suspension." The litany of offenses was delivered in a tone that suggested Maya was building a case for action rather than simply venting frustration. Brittany, Chloe, and Paige began to understand that they were facing someone who had been meticulously documenting their campaign against her, preparing for this moment when restraint would finally give way to retaliation. "We're sorry," Chloe whimpered from her position on the bathroom floor. "We didn't mean for it to go this far." Maya's expression showed no mercy or forgiveness. "You meant exactly for it to go this far. You planned every step of this campaign, and you were prepared to record me in a bathroom to achieve your objectives. Now you're going to face the consequences." The door to the bathroom opened as several students, drawn by the commotion, peered inside to discover a scene that none of them could have anticipated. Maya Rodriguez, the quiet transfer student who had been everyone's favorite victim, stood over 3 of the school's most popular students in a display of dominance that revealed capabilities none of them had suspected. Maya turned to face the witnesses with the same calm authority she had used to neutralize her attackers. These 3 have been recording people in the bathroom without consent. You might want to check your phones and social media accounts to see if you've been victims. 2. The suggestion that Brittany's group had been conducting broader surveillance operations sent shockwaves through the gathered students. Phones began appearing as teenagers checked their various accounts for evidence of unauthorized recordings or privacy violations. Maya walked through the crowd of stunned witnesses and out of the bathroom, leaving behind a scene that would transform the social dynamics of Riverside High School. The quiet girl with the hidden military training had finally shown what happened when tactical patience gave way to strategic action. The war that Brittany Walsh had started was over, but the consequences of her defeat were just beginning to unfold. The news of what had happened in the bathroom spread through Riverside High School with the velocity of wildfire in dry conditions. By the time Maya Rodriguez reached her afternoon chemistry class, every student in the building had heard some version of the story. The details varied wildly depending on the source, but the core facts remained consistent. The quiet transfer student who had endured weeks of harassment had revealed combat skills that left 3 of the school's most powerful students humiliated and defeated. Maya took her usual seat in the back row of the chemistry lab, acutely aware of the whispered conversations and sideways glances from her classmates. The social atmosphere that had surrounded her for weeks had transformed overnight, from dismissive cruelty to wary respect tinged with fear. Students who had previously ignored her existence now watched her movements with the careful attention usually reserved for potentially dangerous wildlife. Dr. Richardson, the chemistry teacher, noticed the unusual tension in his classroom, but couldn't identify its source. Maya had always been one of his quieter students, completing assignments with competent efficiency, while avoiding the social dynamics that occasionally disrupted his lessons. Today, however, the other students seemed focused on her with an intensity that suggested something significant had occurred outside his awareness. The laboratory period proceeded with unusual efficiency as students, who normally engaged in casual conversation, worked in concentrated silence. Maya completed her assigned experiment with the same methodical precision she brought to all academic tasks, but she could feel the weight of constant observation from every direction. The transformation in her social status was as dramatic as it was immediate, though she understood that respect born of fear was fundamentally different from genuine acceptance. When the final bell rang, Maya gathered her materials with deliberate calm while her classmates filed out in groups, their conversations resuming only after they had put distance between themselves and her potentially dangerous presence. She had achieved the isolation she had originally sought, but through means that carried consequences she was still learning to understand. The walk to her locker became an exercise in navigating a social landscape that had been completely restructured in the span of a few hours. Students who had previously joined in Brittany's campaign of harassment now avoided eye contact and gave Maya wide berths in the hallways. The casual cruelty that had characterized her daily experience at Riverside High had been replaced by a nervous deference that acknowledged her newly revealed capabilities. Connor Davis appeared beside her locker as she was organizing her books for evening study. His approach was cautious but determined, suggesting that he had something important to communicate despite the obvious social risks of being seen in conversation with her. "Maya," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure their conversation wouldn't be overheard. "Are you okay? I heard about what happened, and I wanted to make sure you're not hurt." Maya studied his expression, recognizing genuine concern rather than morbid curiosity. Connor had been one of the few students to show her kindness during her ordeal, and his willingness to approach her despite the changed circumstances suggested character that she could respect. "I'm fine," Maya replied, her voice carrying the same controlled tone she had maintained throughout her weeks at Riverside High. "Thank you for asking." Connor hesitated before continuing, clearly struggling with questions he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. "Is it true what they're saying? About you having military training?" The question was inevitable, Maya realized. Her demonstration in the bathroom had revealed capabilities that demanded explanation, and the student body would continue speculating until they received answers that satisfied their curiosity. She could either control the narrative by providing accurate information, or allow rumors to develop that might prove more problematic than the truth. "My mother is Staff Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez," Maya said simply. "I've lived on military bases my entire life. When you move as frequently as military families do, you learn to defend yourself." The explanation was truthful without being complete, providing enough information to satisfy basic curiosity while maintaining operational security. "About the specific nature and extent of her training." Connor nodded with understanding, his expression suggesting that Maya's background explained much about her behavior that he had observed but hadn't been able to interpret. "That makes sense," Connor said. "I'm sorry we didn't figure out what was really happening sooner. Maybe if more of us had stood up to Brittany, things wouldn't have gotten so bad." Maya appreciated the sentiment, but her training had taught her that tactical situations rarely developed according to ideal scenarios. "You warned me about their plan yesterday. That was more help than you realize." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Principal Coleman, whose expression suggested that she was dealing with a situation that had already escalated beyond normal disciplinary procedures. Dr. Coleman was the experienced administrator who had learned to recognize when teenage conflicts crossed lines that required immediate intervention. "Miss Rodriguez," Dr. Coleman said with professional courtesy that masked the complexity of the situation she was addressing, "I need you to come to my office immediately. There are some serious matters we need to discuss." Maya nodded to Connor and followed the principal through hallways that seemed to part before them as students recognized the gravity of an official summons. The administrative wing of Riverside High felt different from the rest of the building, with its polished floors and formal atmosphere designed to reinforce the authority of the adults who manage the complex social ecosystem of teenage education. Dr. Coleman's office reflected her personality, organized, efficient, and focused on practical solutions rather than theoretical ideals. The walls displayed her various degrees and certifications, alongside photographs of successful graduating classes, creating an environment that emphasized both authority and genuine care for student welfare. "Please sit down, Maya," Dr. Coleman said, settling behind her desk with the demeanor of someone who had dealt with countless crisis situations throughout her career. "I've received several reports about an incident that occurred in the girls' bathroom this afternoon. I'd like to hear your version of what happened." Maya had been preparing for this conversation since leaving the bathroom, understanding that her actions would require official explanation regardless of their justification. Her training had taught her the importance of providing accurate information to authority figures while maintaining focus on relevant facts rather than emotional interpretations. Brittany Walsh, Chloe Martinez, and Paige Thompson followed me into the bathroom after they had thrown food at me in the cafeteria. Maya began, her voice maintaining the neutral tone that characterized all of her official communications. "They attempted to record me without my consent, which I understood to be both illegal and a serious violation of my privacy." Dr. Coleman made notes as Maya spoke, her expression revealing nothing about her interpretation of the events being described. "Several witnesses reported that you used physical force against these students. Can you explain those actions?" Maya had anticipated this question and prepared a response that emphasized the defensive nature of her actions while acknowledging their effectiveness. "I defended myself against an assault and prevented them from committing what I believe to be a criminal act." My training has taught me to use minimum necessary force to neutralize threats while avoiding escalation when possible. The principal's eyebrows raised slightly at the mention of training, recognizing that this was a key element in understanding the situation. What kind of training are you referring to, Maya? Maya provided the same explanation she had given Connor, describing her military background, without revealing specific details about her capabilities or the extent of her instruction. Dr. Coleman listened with the attention of someone who was beginning to understand that she was dealing with a situation that extended beyond typical high school conflicts. I see, Dr. Coleman said after Maya had finished her explanation. I've also received reports about a pattern of harassment that you've been experiencing since your arrival at Riverside High. Why didn't you report these incidents to school officials? The question touched on one of the most frustrating aspects of Maya's experience at the school. Her military upbringing had taught her to respect authority and follow proper channels for addressing conflicts, but the sophisticated nature of Brittany's campaign had been designed specifically to avoid official detection. The harassment was carefully orchestrated to appear random or accidental, Maya explained. Individual incidents seemed minor when viewed in isolation, but they were part of a sustained psychological campaign designed to isolate me and create a hostile educational environment. Dr. Coleman's expression suggested that she was familiar with this type of sophisticated bullying, recognizing the challenges it presented for traditional disciplinary approaches. You mentioned that they were attempting to record you in the bathroom. Do you have any evidence of this? Maya described the broken phone and the reactions of the witnesses who had arrived during the aftermath of the confrontation. She also mentioned the warning she had received about Brittany's plans, though she was careful not to identify Connor or the other students who had provided intelligence about the intended assault. The principal spent several minutes reviewing notes and documents, clearly working through the complex legal and disciplinary implications of the situation. Maya waited patiently, understanding that Dr. Coleman was dealing with allegations that could have serious consequences for all of the students involved. Maya, Dr. Coleman finally said, I want you to understand that while I sympathize with the harassment you've experienced, the use of physical force in school is a serious matter that requires investigation. However, the allegations about attempted recording in the bathroom are also extremely serious and may involve criminal behavior. Maya nodded her understanding, recognizing that Dr. Coleman was trying to balance multiple competing concerns while ensuring that appropriate action was taken. I understand, Dr. Coleman. I'm prepared to accept responsibility for my actions. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Dr. Coleman's secretary entered to announce that Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had arrived and was requesting an immediate meeting regarding her daughter's situation. Maya felt a mixture of relief and apprehension at her mother's arrival, knowing that military intervention would bring both support and additional scrutiny to the situation. Staff Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez entered Dr. Coleman's office with the bearing and authority that came from years of military service. She was a compact woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing in her assessment of any situation. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, and her demeanor conveyed the sort of professional competence that commanded automatic respect from civilian administrators. Dr. Coleman, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said with polite firmness, I received a call about an incident involving my daughter. I'd like a complete briefing on the situation. Dr. Coleman provided a summary of the bathroom confrontation and the harassment that had preceded it, while Maya remained silent and allowed the adults to discuss the official implications of her actions. She watched her mother's expression as the principal described the events, noting the subtle signs of anger and pride that competed in Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's controlled features. Has anyone contacted the police about the attempted recording? Staff Sergeant Rodriguez asked, focusing immediately on the most serious legal aspects of the situation. Dr. Coleman admitted that she hadn't yet involved law enforcement, explaining that she was still gathering information about what had actually occurred. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's expression suggested that she viewed this delay as a significant oversight that needed immediate correction. Principal Coleman, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said with the authority of someone accustomed to cutting through bureaucratic complications. Recording someone without consent in a bathroom is a serious crime in North Carolina. If students at this school are engaging in such behavior, law enforcement needs to be involved immediately. The principal agreed to contact the appropriate authorities, recognizing that the situation had escalated beyond the scope of typical school discipline. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez then turned her attention to Maya, studying her daughter with the analytical gaze of a military professional, assessing a subordinate's performance under pressure. "Maya," her mother said quietly, "are you injured?" "No, ma'am," Maya replied, automatically falling into the formal communication style that characterized their interactions when her mother was in uniform. "Did you initiate physical contact with the other students?" "No, ma'am. I defended myself against assault and prevented the commission of what I believed to be a criminal act." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez nodded approvingly, recognizing that Maya had acted within the parameters of her training while maintaining appropriate restraint. "Did you use excessive force in your response?" "No, ma'am. I used minimum necessary force to neutralize the threat and control the situation." The exchange between mother and daughter revealed the military precision that had shaped Maya's character and informed her actions during the crisis. Dr. Coleman observed their interaction with growing understanding of the unique challenges that military families faced when integrating into civilian communities. "Dr. Coleman," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said, returning her attention to the principal, "I want to ensure that this incident is investigated thoroughly and that appropriate action is taken against any students who have engaged in criminal behavior. I also want to review the anti-bullying policies at this school to understand how a sustained harassment campaign was allowed to continue without intervention." The meeting continued for another hour as the adults worked through the procedural and legal requirements that would govern the school's response to the situation. Maya provided additional details when requested, but otherwise remained silent, understanding that her role was to answer questions rather than advocate for particular outcomes. When they finally left Dr. Coleman's office, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Maya walked to their car in silence. Maya knew that a more detailed conversation would occur once they were in private, away from the civilian environment that required her mother to maintain diplomatic relationships with school officials. The drive home provided the opportunity for the frank discussion that both mother and daughter understood was necessary. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had learned enough about the situation to recognize that Maya had been dealing with sophisticated psychological warfare that would have challenged even experienced military personnel. "Tell me everything," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said as they sat in their kitchen that evening, "starting from your first day at Riverside High." Maya provided a comprehensive debrief that covered every aspect of Brittany's campaign against her, from the initial targeting through the systematic escalation that had culminated in the bathroom assault. She described her strategic decision to maintain restraint, the intelligence she had gathered about her opponents, and the tactical considerations that had finally forced her to abandon passive defense in favor of direct action. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions that helped her understand the complexity of the social dynamics that had shaped Maya's experience. As a military professional, she could appreciate the sophisticated nature of the psychological operations that had been conducted against her daughter. "You handled this well," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez finally said when Maya had finished her report. "You gathered intelligence, maintained operational security, and used appropriate force when peaceful options were exhausted. Your restraint probably prevented a much more serious escalation." Maya felt a surge of relief at her mother's approval. Having worried that her actions might be seen as a failure of discipline, rather than a necessary response to an untenable situation. What happens now? Staff Sergeant Rodriguez explained that the school would be conducting a formal investigation with assistance from local law enforcement. The attempted recording in the bathroom would be treated as a potential criminal matter, and the pattern of harassment would be examined to determine whether additional charges were appropriate. More importantly, from Maya's perspective, the revelation of her capabilities had fundamentally altered the social dynamics at Riverside High. Students who had participated in or enabled Brittany's campaign now understood that they had been targeting someone with the training and ability to defend herself effectively. The transformation became apparent when Maya returned to school the following week. The hallways that had once felt like hostile territory now provided clear paths as students moved aside to allow her passage. Teachers who had viewed her with suspicion following her suspension now treated her with the respect due to someone who had been the victim of systematic harassment. Brittany Walsh, Chloe Martinez, and Paige Thompson were conspicuously absent from their usual positions of social dominance. The investigation into their attempted recording had revealed additional victims among the student body, leading to serious disciplinary action and potential criminal charges. The empire of fear and manipulation that they had built over years of unchallenged power had collapsed in a matter of days. Connor Davis approached Maya during lunch period, carrying a tray and wearing the expression of someone who was making a conscious choice despite potential social risks. "Mind if I sit with you?" he asked, gesturing toward the empty seats at her table. Maya nodded, recognizing that Connor was making a public statement about his willingness to associate with her despite the changed circumstances. Other students watched their interaction with interest, understanding that Connor's choice would influence how others responded to Maya's transformed status. "How are you handling all this?" Connor asked as he settled into his seat across from her. Maya considered the question carefully, recognizing that her answer would affect not only their relationship but also the broader social dynamics that were still evolving around her. "It's different," she said finally. "People treat me differently now, but I'm not sure if it's better or worse." Connor understood her meaning. The fear-based respect that Maya now commanded was preferable to the harassment she had endured, but it still left her isolated from the normal social connections that made high school bearable for most students. "Give it time," Connor suggested. "People need to adjust to knowing who you really are. Once they realize you're not going to hurt anyone who doesn't deserve it, things might get more normal." Their conversation was overheard by nearby tables, and Maya noticed several students listening with the sort of attention that suggested they were trying to understand how to interact with someone whose capabilities exceeded their previous experience. The challenge of integrating her military background with civilian social expectations was becoming more complex rather than simpler. Over the following weeks, Maya found herself occupying a unique position within Riverside High's social ecosystem. Students approached her with requests for help dealing with their own bullying situations, recognizing that she possessed both the skills and the willingness to intervene when traditional authority figures proved ineffective. Maya accepted these requests selectively, using her training to assess whether intervention was appropriate and what methods would be most effective. She discovered that her reputation alone was often sufficient to resolve conflicts as potential aggressors reconsidered their behavior when faced with the possibility of her involvement. The most significant change came when Mr. Peterson, the school's athletic director, approached Maya about starting a self-defense program for students who wanted to learn basic protective skills. The idea had emerged from discussions among faculty members who recognized that Maya's training represented a valuable resource that could benefit the entire school community. Maya agreed to help develop the program, working with Mr. Peterson and her mother to create a curriculum that would teach practical defensive techniques while emphasizing the responsibility and restraint that should govern their use. The program became popular among students who had felt vulnerable in the face of harassment, providing them with both practical skills and the confidence that came from knowing they could protect themselves. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez observed her daughter's growing role as a protective figure within the school community with a mixture of pride and concern. Maya was using her training in exactly the way it was intended, to protect those who couldn't. Protect themselves while maintaining the discipline and judgment that prevented unnecessary escalation. The final resolution of the investigation into Brittany's harassment campaign came during Maya's second month back at school. The evidence gathered by school officials and law enforcement had revealed a pattern of systematic abuse that affected dozens of students over multiple years. The legal consequences for the perpetrators would follow them long after graduation, while the victims finally received official recognition and support. Maya testified during the disciplinary proceedings, providing a detailed account of the psychological warfare that had been conducted against her. Her testimony was delivered with the same professional precision that characterized all of her communications, focusing on facts rather than emotions while making clear the sophisticated nature of the campaign that had been waged. Dr. Coleman used the opportunity to implement comprehensive changes to Riverside High's anti-bullying policies, creating systems that would make it much more difficult for future harassment campaigns to develop without detection. Maya's experience had provided valuable insights into the methods that sophisticated bullies used to avoid official scrutiny. As winter gave way to spring, Maya found herself genuinely settled at Riverside High for the first time since her arrival. The social dynamics that had once seemed insurmountable had evolved to accommodate her unique background and capabilities. Students who had initially feared her had learned to respect her judgment and appreciate her protective presence. Connor Davis had become a genuine friend, one of several students who valued Maya's intelligence and character rather than simply tolerating her out of fear. The self-defense program had created connections with other students who shared interests in practical skills and personal development. Most importantly, Maya had learned to integrate her military training with civilian life in ways that honored both sets of values. She remained the disciplined, strategic thinker that her upbringing had created, but she had also discovered how to use those qualities in service of community building rather than simply personal survival. The transformation was complete when Maya realized that she no longer thought of Riverside High as a hostile environment to be endured until the next military relocation. It had become a community where she belonged, where her skills were valued, and where she could contribute to something larger than her own immediate needs. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez noticed the change in her daughter's demeanor and recognized that Maya had successfully navigated one of the most challenging transitions that military families faced: the integration of military discipline with civilian social expectations was never easy, but Maya had found a path that preserved her essential character while allowing her to thrive in her new environment. The story of the quiet transfer student who had revealed hidden military training became part of Riverside High's institutional memory, passed down through graduating classes as a reminder that people were often much more complex and capable than they appeared on the surface. Students learned to look beyond first impressions and to treat others with the respect that acknowledged unknown depths and hidden strengths. Maya Rodriguez had started the school year as an invisible outsider, trying to survive until the next inevitable relocation. She finished it as a respected member of a community that valued her contributions and appreciated the unique perspective that her military background provided. The girl who had been trained for war had found her place by building peace, proving that true strength was best measured not by the capacity for destruction, but by the wisdom to protect and nurture those who needed protection. Years later, as Maya prepared for college and eventually her own military service, she would look back on her time at Riverside High as the place where she learned that her training was not just about personal capability, but about responsibility to others. The bullies who had thought they were targeting a vulnerable victim had instead awakened a protector, who would spend her life ensuring that others never had to face the isolation and harassment that she had endured. The lesson echoed through the hallways of Riverside High long after Maya had graduated, reminding each new generation of students that the quiet ones might be quiet for reasons they couldn't imagine, and that underestimating people based on appearances was a mistake that could have consequences far beyond what anyone expected. The graduation ceremony at Riverside High School took place on a warm May evening, with the setting sun casting golden light across the football field where families gathered to celebrate their children's achievements. Maya Rodriguez sat among her classmates in the front rows, her cap and gown identical to everyone else's, but her presence carried a weight that distinguished her from the typical graduating senior. Over the past year and a half, she had become something of a legend within the school's walls, though she had never sought such recognition. Principal Coleman stepped to the podium to deliver her annual address to the graduating class, but this year her words carried special significance. As she reflected on the transformations that had occurred during Maya's tenure at the school, the administrator had learned valuable lessons about the complexity of teenage social dynamics and the importance of creating systems that could detect and address sophisticated forms of harassment before they escalated to crisis levels. This graduating class has taught us all important lessons about courage, resilience, and the power of standing up for what's right, Dr. Coleman said, her eyes briefly meeting Maya's as she spoke. They've shown us that real strength isn't about intimidating others or maintaining power through fear. Real strength is about protecting those who need protection and using our capabilities to build communities rather than tear them down. Maya listened to the speech with the same quiet attention she brought to all official proceedings, but she understood that the principal's words were, in part, a reflection on the changes that had swept through Riverside High following the confrontation. In the bathroom nearly 2 years earlier, the incident had become a catalyst for institutional reforms that extended far beyond the punishment of 3 students who had crossed legal and ethical boundaries. The self-defense program that Maya had helped establish had grown into one of the school's most popular extracurricular activities, attracting students from all social backgrounds who wanted to learn practical protective skills. More importantly, the program had fostered a culture of mutual support and empowerment that had fundamentally altered the school's social dynamics. Students who had once felt vulnerable now possessed both the skills and the confidence to defend themselves, while potential aggressors understood that their actions would face organized resistance. Connor Davis, who was seated nearby in the graduation assembly, had become one of the program's most dedicated participants and eventually one of its student instructors. His friendship with Maya had evolved into a partnership in community building that had enriched both of their high school experiences. Connor had learned that true courage sometimes meant standing with unpopular causes, while Maya had discovered that leadership could be exercised through teaching and mentoring, rather than simply through superior capability. The transformation of Riverside High's social environment had attracted attention from educational researchers and anti-bullying advocates who wanted to understand how a single incident had catalyzed such comprehensive change. Maya had participated in several studies and interviews, though she remained uncomfortable with being portrayed as a heroic figure rather than simply someone who had defended herself when peaceful options were exhausted. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a researcher from the University of North Carolina who had spent months studying the changes at Riverside High, had concluded that Maya's impact extended far beyond her individual actions. The revelation of her military training had forced students and faculty to confront their assumptions about appearances and capabilities, while her subsequent behavior had demonstrated how strength could be used constructively rather than destructively. Maya Rodriguez didn't just defend herself, Dr. Martinez had written in her preliminary report. She provided a model for how individuals with exceptional capabilities can integrate into civilian communities while maintaining their core values and contributing to collective welfare. Her story challenges common narratives about military families and demonstrates the positive impact that disciplined, service-oriented individuals can have on educational environments. Maya found the academic analysis of her experience both flattering and somewhat bewildering. From her perspective, she had simply done what her training and upbringing had prepared her to do: assess threats, respond appropriately, and work to improve conditions for everyone involved. The fact that these actions had produced such significant institutional change suggested that the problems at Riverside High had been more deeply rooted than anyone had realized. Brittany Walsh, Chloe Martinez, and Paige Thompson had all transferred to other schools following the investigation into their harassment campaign. The legal consequences of their attempted bathroom recording had followed them to their new institutions, creating permanent records that would affect college applications and future opportunities. Maya occasionally wondered whether they had learned from their experience or simply found new targets for their psychological warfare. The ripple effects of their departure had been profound and positive. Students who had been intimidated into silence found their voices, academic performance improved across multiple grade levels, and the general atmosphere of the school shifted from one of fearful hierarchy to collaborative community. Teachers reported fewer disciplinary problems and greater engagement in classroom discussions, while the administration noted significant decreases in reports of harassment and bullying. Sarah Kim, who had been one of the students brave enough to warn Maya about Brittany's planned assault, had become a leader in the school's peer counseling program. Her willingness to take risks in order to help someone in danger had inspired others to step forward when they witnessed injustice, creating a network of mutual support that had proven more effective than any top-down intervention. Maya showed us that we didn't have to be victims, Sarah had explained during a school assembly celebrating the peer counseling program's achievements. But more than that, she showed us that we had a responsibility to help each other. When someone has the power to make a difference and chooses not to use it, they become part of the problem. Marcus Thompson, the debate team member who had also participated in warning Maya, had channeled his experience into advocacy work that extended beyond Riverside High. He had testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger anti-bullying measures and had helped draft policies that were being implemented in school districts across North Carolina. What happened at our school proved that traditional approaches to bullying don't work when you're dealing with sophisticated psychological warfare, Marcus had told the legislative committee. We need systems that can detect patterns of harassment, even when individual incidents seem minor, and we need to empower students to intervene safely when they see injustice occurring. Maya's mother, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, had received commendations from her military superiors for the way she had handled the crisis at her daughter's school. Her professional approach to working with civilian authorities had created positive relationships between the military installation and the local community, while her daughter's conduct had reflected well on military families throughout the region. The experience had also strengthened the bond between mother and daughter, as they had navigated the complex challenges of integrating military values with civilian social expectations. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had come to appreciate the unique pressures that military children faced when entering civilian schools, while Maya had gained deeper understanding of the broader responsibilities that came with her training and capabilities. Maya has always understood that her skills come with obligations, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had explained during a military family support group meeting. What she learned at Riverside High was how to fulfill those obligations in a civilian context while building the kinds of relationships that make communities stronger. The graduation ceremony continued with the traditional presentation of awards and recognition of outstanding achievements. Maya received several honors, including recognition for her community service through the self-defense program and an academic excellence award for maintaining high grades despite the challenges she had faced during her integration into the school community. When her name was called to receive her diploma, Maya walked across the stage with the same measured confidence that had characterized her behavior throughout her time at Riverside High. The applause from her classmates was genuine and sustained, reflecting respect that had been earned rather than demanded. She shook hands with Dr. Coleman, who whispered words of encouragement and pride that Maya would remember for years to come. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photographs and celebrations, Maya found herself surrounded by students who wanted to express their gratitude for the changes she had helped bring about. Many of them had never been direct victims of harassment, but they understood that the improved school environment had benefited everyone who valued safety, respect, and genuine community. "Thank you for showing us what real courage looks like," said Jennifer Park, a sophomore who had joined the self-defense program during its second year. "I used to be afraid to speak up in class or express opinions that might be unpopular. Now, I know that standing up for yourself and others is not just possible, it's necessary." Connor Davis approached Maya as the crowd began to thin, carrying a wrapped package that he presented with the slightly awkward formality that characterized important moments in teenage friendships. "I wanted to give you something to remember. U.S. Bye," he said, his voice carrying emotion that he was trying to keep controlled. Maya opened the package to find a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. Inside, Connor had written an inscription, "For someone who taught us all that quiet strength can move mountains. Thank you for showing us who you really are." The gift touched Maya more deeply than she had expected. Throughout her military upbringing, she had learned to avoid forming attachments that would make inevitable relocations more painful. Her experience at Riverside High had taught her that some connections were worth the emotional cost of eventual separation, and that the lessons learned through genuine friendship could last long after physical proximity ended. "Thank you, Maya," said simply, understanding that Connor's gift represented not just personal appreciation but recognition from the entire community that had grown around the values she had tried to embody. As the evening progressed and families began departing, Maya and her mother walked across the football field where the ceremony had taken place. The stadium lights had been turned off, leaving only the softer illumination from the parking lot to guide their steps. The setting provided an opportunity for the kind of private conversation that had become more frequent as Maya prepared to leave for college. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Staff Sergeant Rodriguez asked, referring to Maya's acceptance into the United States Military Academy at West Point, where she would begin her own journey toward military service. Maya considered the question carefully, understanding that her mother was asking about more than just academic preparation. The experience at Riverside High had taught her valuable lessons about leadership, community building, and the responsible use of power that would serve her well in whatever career path she eventually chose. "I think so," Maya replied. "I've learned that being strong isn't just about what you can do to protect yourself. It's about what you can do to make things better for everyone around you." The conversation continued as they drove home through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, past the neighborhoods where Maya had learned to navigate civilian life while maintaining her military identity. The small town had become more than just another temporary assignment. It had become the place where she discovered how to integrate her training with her desire to serve others constructively. Over the summer between graduation and her departure for West Point, Maya continued working with the self-defense program and expanded her involvement in community service projects. The local police department had asked her to help develop training materials for their youth outreach programs, while several other schools in the district had requested her assistance in implementing similar protective education initiatives. The work provided Maya with insights into the broader applications of the lessons she had learned at Riverside High. Every community faced challenges related to power dynamics, intimidation, and the need to protect vulnerable members. The specific skills she had acquired through military training were less important than the principles they embodied. situational awareness, strategic thinking, proportional response, and the commitment to use strength in service of justice rather than personal advantage. Dr. Coleman had asked Maya to return the following year to speak at the graduation ceremony for the class behind her, recognizing that her story had become an important part of Riverside High's institutional identity. The invitation reflected the school's commitment to preserving the lessons learned through Maya's experience while continuing to evolve its approaches to student welfare and community building. Your presence changed this place in ways that will outlast your time here, Dr. Coleman had explained during their final meeting. The students who come after you will benefit from the example you set and the systems you helped create. That's a legacy worth celebrating. Maya accepted the invitation while understanding that her role as a symbol of positive change carried ongoing responsibilities. The story of the quiet transfer student who had revealed hidden military training would continue to inspire others, long after she had moved on to new challenges and opportunities. The final weeks before her departure for West Point passed quickly, filled with preparations for college and farewells to the community that had become her home. Maya visited the self-defense program one last time, working with the student instructors who would carry on the teaching responsibilities she was leaving behind. Remember that the most important thing we teach here isn't the physical techniques, Maya told the group of students who had gathered for her farewell session. It's the confidence to stand up for yourselves and others, and the wisdom to know when and how to use that confidence constructively. The students listened with the respect and attention that Maya had learned to appreciate during her time as a mentor and teacher. Many of them had never experienced the kind of harassment that had brought Maya to their school, but they understood that the skills and attitudes they were learning would serve them well in whatever challenges they eventually faced. Connor Davis had been accepted to North Carolina State University, where he planned to study education with the goal of becoming a teacher and eventually a school administrator. His experience working with Maya on community building projects had convinced him that educational environments could be transformed through dedicated effort and principled leadership. I want to create the kind of school where students like you don't have to fight just to be left alone, Connor had told Maya during one of their final conversations. I want to build places where everyone's strengths are recognized and everyone's dignity is protected. Maya's departure from Cedar Falls was marked by a small gathering of students, faculty, and community members who had been touched by her presence at Riverside High. The event was informal and voluntary, reflecting the genuine affection that had developed around her contributions to the school community. Sarah Kim presented Maya with a scrapbook containing photographs, letters, and artwork created by students who wanted to express their gratitude for the changes she had helped bring about. The collection represented perspectives from across the social spectrum of the school, demonstrating that Maya's impact had extended far beyond the students who had participated directly in her programs. You taught us that we all have more strength than we realize, Sarah said as she presented the gift. More importantly, you taught us that strength is meant to be shared, not hoarded. Maya accepted the scrapbook with emotions that she struggled to control, understanding that the collection represented not just personal appreciation, but evidence of the community transformation that had grown from her individual actions. The course not just personal appreciation, but evidence of the community transformation that had grown from her individual action. Shy transfer student who had arrived at Riverside High seeking only to survive until the next military relocation was leaving as someone who had helped create lasting positive change. The drive to West Point took Maya and her mother through familiar landscapes that marked the transition from one phase of life to another. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez used the journey to share final words of advice and encouragement, drawing on her own military experience to prepare her daughter for the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. Remember that leadership isn't about having the most power or the loudest voice, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said as they approached the academy. Real leadership is about service, sacrifice, and a commitment to something larger than yourself. You've already proven that you understand these principles. Now you need to learn how to apply them on a larger scale. Maya's arrival at West Point marked the beginning of a new chapter in her development as both a military professional and a community leader. The Academy's environment was designed to challenge cadets physically, intellectually, and morally, preparing them for leadership roles in an increasingly complex world. The lessons Maya had learned at Riverside High served her well during the demanding transition to military college life. Her experience with sophisticated psychological warfare helped her recognize and counter the mental pressure techniques that were part of the Academy's training methodology. More importantly, her understanding of community building and protective leadership gave her tools for supporting fellow cadets who struggled with the intense environment. During her first semester, Maya was selected to serve as a peer mentor for incoming cadets, a role that allowed her to apply the teaching and counseling skills she had developed through her work with the self-defense program. Her approach emphasized the principles she had learned through experience: situational awareness, mutual support, and the responsible use of power. "Strength without compassion is just bullying in uniform," Maya told a group of first-year cadets. During one of her mentoring sessions, "The military teaches us to be strong so we can protect people who can't protect themselves. Never forget that our power comes with the obligation to use it wisely." The advice reflected lessons that Maya continued to learn and refine as she progressed through her military education. Her experience at Riverside High had taught her that individual actions could create ripple effects that extended far beyond their immediate context, while her ongoing development at West Point was teaching her how to scale those principles for application in larger, more complex organizations. Years later, as Maya prepared to graduate from the Academy and accept her commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Army, she would look back on her time at Riverside High as the foundation for everything that followed. The quiet transfer student who had been forced to reveal her hidden capabilities had evolved into a confident leader who understood that true strength lay not in the capacity for destruction, but in the wisdom to build and protect communities. The story of Maya Rodriguez became part of West Point's institutional memory, passed down through classes of cadets as an example of how military training and civilian values could be integrated to create positive change. Her experience demonstrated that the principles of service and sacrifice that define military life were equally applicable in educational, community, and family contexts. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.